Welcome to Awesome Movie Year, the podcast where we take a look back at an awesome year for movies, which is every year. My name is Josh Bell, film critic and writer, and I am joined by my co-host.
I'm Jason Harris, filmmaker, comedian, and sadly, this is the last episode of Awesome Movie Year because Josh insists on having Forever as the new theme song, where Dave and I both feel that Faithful would be the way to go.
We're going to war over this argument because that's the only solution possible.
I mean, it's not the craziest thing that people have gone for war for, is it?
No, that's true. I mean, I think that's the idea here in this film. This is sort of a shift from our normal lineup that we do for most Awesome Movie Years. And this season, we're talking about the films of 1939. And normally we do an episode on a documentary film, but documentary as a form didn't really kind of blossom yet at this point. So there wasn't really much of note for us to talk about. So we decided to switch it up and go with a different kind of filmmaking that I think in the past we've talked about doing a dedicated episode for this in other seasons, and we've never done it, but we decided to do an episode on an animated film, and we are talking about the Fleischer brothers film Gulliver's Travels.
Yes, which was so momentous that Jonathan Swift based his book on it 300 or 200 years earlier.
Yeah. He rose from the dead and said, "What kind of crappy ass movie did you make that you put my name on?"
Did we do, was it 2012 or did we do 2012 or something? We did, didn't we?
Yeah.
That was going to be the year because I had Wreck-It Ralph and there was a lot of different animated movies that we thought we could do a full category on.
Yeah. I mean, we've covered animated movies before in other categories, Disney movies, and we did Finding Nemo, the Pixar film. And just recently we did Tokyo Godfathers as our holiday special. So we've done, I think, 4 or 5 other animated movies, but we've never had it as a specific episode category. And who knows? Maybe we will again going forward. You never know.
You don't. That's the thing about Awesome Movie Year, Josh. We're full of surprises.
We are, much like Gulliver.
Yeah. Why doesn't Jonathan Swift write a chapter or a section of a book on us?
I
guess that would be a section, right? Because there were 4 full stories in there.
Yeah, I think there's more than one chapter. I read Gulliver's Travels, I think in high school, but I don't really remember a whole lot about it. I don't know if you didn't read any books in high school, right? I just read them and you copied my homework.
That's true. I did use Gulliver's Travels as a punchline to an old joke, though, because in the airport here in Las Vegas, they have all the signs for the different attractions and the different shows. And there used to be a sign up for the library, the public library. And I was just thinking, like, they really have mistargeted who they're advertising to. Like, I don't see a bunch of dudes coming in on bachelor parties like, let's get strippers and do coke and party all night. And the groom's like, nah, you guys do that. I'm going to go read Gulliver's Travels at the library.
They do have it at the library. So they could have put up a sign for does that still exist? The strip club called the library? That would have been more appropriate, I think.
I had never been there, but I thought of all the strip clubs, that would have been a fun one to go to because it was on Boulder Highway, away from everything. It's like, it's not the top of the line, shall we say.
Well, it's too bad that Gulliver never came to Las Vegas.
Would he even fit, Josh? He'd be right next to the Stratosphere.
Well, he's normal size. It's the Lilliputians who are small, I think.
The Brobdingnagians are the giants.
Yeah, they might have trouble, but Gulliver would fit right in here.
See, you corrected me just like you used to do with our homework.
Right. Anyway, this film was the second ever animated feature film produced by an American studio. Of course, Walt Disney's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs from 1937 was the first, and that was the first ever hand-drawn animated film, period. And that had been a huge success, so it's not surprising that other studios decided to capitalize on that. Paramount Pictures released this film and hired the Fleischer brothers, Max and Dave Fleischer, and their studio to create it under a very tight timeline of 18 months. It was originally set to star Popeye, who was the star of a bunch of Fleischer brothers shorts and was going to be sort of the Gulliver figure. That actually is something that had already been done by Disney. There's a Mickey Mouse short from a few years before this where he fills the Gulliver role going to Lilliput, but eventually they decided to make it an original piece just based on the book and really based on that one section of the book where Gulliver travels to Lilliput. I think, as Jason, you said, there's 4 sections, right? And he goes to like 4 or 5 different weird places.
Yeah, he goes to Lilliput where they're doing the war. He goes to the Brobdingnagians, right, where they're all giants and he's small, right? I think there's a one where there's a flying island, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think that's right. And they like they drop things on their enemies below or something like that.
Hey, that's fun,
isn't it?
Yeah. So, yeah. And then the 4th voyage, he lives with sentient horses in the land of Cunhims. I'm sure I'm pronouncing that wrong. All you literary scholars out there, please correct me. But honestly, those other stories sound pretty cool. Why don't we ever get them?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think partly that's like a lot to include, and especially just in a single feature film, and partly because this movie did so well and is so well known that people just think of Gulliver's Travels as this one particular story, and that's what ends up being adapted. It was.
Don't you want to see Yorgos Lanthimos directed Gulliver's Travels, where he's in a land of sentient horses?
Actually, that would be great. I feel like maybe that's part of the problem, is that somewhere along the line, again, maybe because of the success of this movie, although even before this, right, we'd had Mickey Mouse doing it. People think of this as like a children's story, even though I don't think that's at all what Jonathan Swift intended it to be. And so we don't get weird adult films like something by Yorgos Lanthimos adapting Gulliver's Travels, but maybe that's the way to go.
I mean, to me, when you were just talking about Mickey Mouse in it, what I thought is like, hey, Steamboat Willie, it's now public domain. We're getting all these horror movies. Why aren't we getting the Gulliver horror movie where he's just going to or an action movie where he's going and just effing people up? And maybe he could use his sentient horses and his flying friends to mess people up.
That's true. I mean, Gulliver's Travels, the book, has been in the public domain. I mean, it was published hundreds of years ago, so anyone could do it. And this film too is in the public domain if you wanted to use any of the designs or anything like that from this movie. It had been previously adapted, Gulliver's Travels, including in 1902 was the very first adaptation by George Méliès. And it's a 4-minute silent film, and yet it actually does adapt more of the story than this does. He travels to Lilliput, and he also goes to the Brobdingnagians, where he is small and they are very large, and it's quite good. I watched it online, and it's 4 minutes, it's silent, but it's really impressive to see what Méliès can do with the early special effects that he developed all the way back in 1902.
Yeah, I got to watch that. I watched a Voyage to the Moon recently again.
Yeah.
Trip to the Moon. What are we calling it?
Yeah, I can't remember what it is. Yeah.
But, you might remember it, you 90s kids, as the basis for the Smashing Pumpkins Tonight video. But it's such a cool short. I mean, he was, not just a father of filmmaking, but like he was really ahead of his years, I'd say.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can see sort of the seams of what he's doing in camera, but it still looks quite impressive, and it has this surrealist quality to it that's very captivating. So I don't think we're ever going to do like awesome movie year 1902. So we'll probably never get a George Méliès
episode. All 4 minutes.
Right, exactly. But it's fascinating to watch that stuff. So also, there had been the Mickey Mouse short film. There was an Austrian silent film, and there was a feature film, a Soviet film that used stop motion animation for most of its running time, which was the first ever feature film featuring stop motion animation. So adapting this story is like a way to do groundbreaking things in early film for whatever reason.
The Russian movie, Gulliver looks at tank, back on Gulliver, same expression. Gulliver looks at woman wanting soup, back on Gulliver, same expression.
It's the
Eisenstein.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? The Eisenstein technique. That was a deep film joke for you guys right there.
I think it does reinterpret it as a sort of like socialist parable, but I didn't watch that movie. I don't know how available it is.
Hey, I did read the Jonathan Swift A Modest Proposal back in the day, where you're talking about how this is a kid's movie, and that the whole, Swiftian is what we, interpret as satire a lot. And that was, The Modest Proposal was that to get rid of hungry people, we feed them children.
Yeah.
And that was a fun read.
I think we read that in school too. Maybe that was very short, and so you were able to read that one.
Yeah. Also, it was a little more like, hey, they're going to eat the kids. Let's see what that's about.
Right. So. Right. Obviously, a satire. So the animation here it was interesting to me because this is trying to capitalize on the success of Snow White, and you can see, especially in the design of the Lilliputians, that they have some resemblance to like the Seven Dwarfs and stuff like that. But they used rotoscoping to animate Gulliver as well as the Prince and Princess, and you can see in the film, especially with Gulliver, that they look much more like realistically human. And partly that was because of this very tight timeline that they had to finish the film. But I feel like it actually works well because it gives you the real contrast between Gulliver, the person from our world, and this strange world of the Lilliputians that he has discovered.
You alluded to this, Josh, in a prior statement. The animation is not the problem with this film.
Right.
It's the stretching of the story, and it's not very good in that regard.
Right. I mean, I think not only do they have to just use the one section of the book, but they very much have to find ways to make it into this kind of kid-friendly, fairy story, and put cute, goofy characters in it and stuff like that. And the Prince and Princess, who are not characters, I believe, from the book, give them a little romance and all this stuff that's really copying what Disney had done. And it does not go well, really. But the animation is beautiful. I mean, whatever it was, if they were, under this really difficult deadline, like they did a great job. I think they made it look beautiful.
Yeah, I agree. I like the animation. I have issues with other elements of this.
Yes. So it was a success, though. It grossed $3.27 million on its budget of $700,000, which was still over budget. And the Fleischers got fined or charged by Paramount for going over budget, even though this movie was a hit. So
yeah, what a bunch of dicks. Can I just stop you right there? Because these guys, they basically moved their entire operation to Miami, right, from New York. And they had to hire 700 new people. They had this, I think they were saying it took half the time that it took to get Snow White done, right? They got it done. It made a ton of money, and they still fined him. And that, that's part of why this company went out of business not too long after that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it seems like Paramount essentially used that as leverage to take over the company a couple of years later. So a Hollywood studio did something shady. I don't know how we can be shocked by that.
Yeah, that's crazy. And that was Barney Balaban, who was the head of Paramount at the time. Josh.
Shame on you, Barney Balaban. This film was also nominated for 2 Oscars for Best Original Score and Best Original Song for Faithful Forever, which lost to Somewhere Over the Rainbow, as it should have, really.
Yeah, I'm not as familiar with the other songs in the 1939 Oscars, but that's not a great song, The Faithful and Forever.
No, it's not. I mean, and it's really more just a plot device than a song. I mean, it is a song, but it's just, as you were sort of referencing earlier, the idea that these 2 kingdoms each have their own particular song that they insist on playing at the wedding of the prince and princess, and that's what leads to their dispute. It's really more about that and how they can resolve it rather than what a great song this is.
Yeah, it's not a great song.
No.
But it is the impetus for war, so I give it that much.
Yeah, what an achievement, really. So critics were mildly positive on this, although everyone compared it to Snow White, of course.
Oh, yeah. Well, and I don't blame them. I compared it to Snow White when I watched it, last week.
Right. Yeah, it's reasonable to do that. So Frank S. Nugent in the New York Times said, "We have no hesitation in recommending Paramount's new film as a pleasant and diverting animated picture book, drawn in the brightest Technicolor, happily free from ogres, hobgoblins, and other nightmare breeders, and so broad in its humor that the littlest 4-year-old can scarcely miss its jokes. But by any other standards than those of the juvenile audience, the film is so far beneath the level of Mr. Disney's famous fantasy that, out of charity, we wish we did not have to make the comparisons demanded by professional responsibility. If it were only possible to soften the blow by suggesting that the second feature cartoon automatically loses the novelty value of the first, we should be cushioning our typewriter with the excuse right now. But it is far more than novelty that Gulliver lacks. It is the wit, the freshness, the gaiety and sparkle, the subtlety, the characterization, and for that matter, the good drawing that are the trademarks of the Disney factory.
So I'll get rid of the good drawing part because I agree with you. The animation's really cool here.
Yeah, and I definitely think so, especially like the backgrounds or, you can't say those aren't well drawn. They're beautiful.
I 100% agree that the characters aren't, characters are nothing.
Yeah.
Even Gulliver is nothing here, right?
Gulliver is unconscious for half this movie. Literally unconscious.
So, there's nothing to the characters. We already mentioned the songs don't compare to like Hi Ho or, any other that you want to pick from. What do you want to pick from Snow White?
Well, I mean, I think Hi Ho is a good example because they're clearly trying to like imitate that with the little working song for the Lilliputians, right?
Yeah. And the thing is, they had all these like, besides the kings, they had like these other workers. They could have made them into different characters. It just felt like it was, maybe that was the rush job here. It's like, hey, we got to animate, so let's just go as straight line as possible.
Right. Yeah, they could have spent a little more time on the writing or whatever, or figured out a better way to adapt this book, perhaps. But
maybe they didn't read it.
Yeah, it's not. They might have just read a summary of it. It's possible.
No, I mean, like you said, like I'm like, dude, how long is this guy going to be tied down for?
Right. I was looking at because this is a very short movie. And I was looking at the running time, and it is more than half, a little over half of the running time before Gulliver literally like wakes up and speaks. And he is the title character of the film.
And he's just, all he is like a beacon of good judgment or doing the right thing, I guess. Like there's no real character to Gulliver either.
Right. And I think Gulliver in the book is, representative of sort of like the English everyman or whatever. And he becomes kind of corrupted and whatnot over time. And, there's none of that satirical element here really that they take from the book.
Right. They literally go to war because they can't decide which song to play at a wedding. And there's no kind of humor encapsulated in that in this piece.
Yeah. So Variety in their unbylined review said, 2 years ago, Walt Disney released the first feature-length cartoon, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Its novelty, production excellence, and entertainment factors rolled up terrific grosses for all. Gulliver's Travels is the second cartoon feature to hit the market. Turned out by Max Fleischer, who has been making cartoon shorts for 20 years, it is an excellent job of animation, audience interest, and all-around showmanship. On the entertainment side, Gulliver's Travels is a thoroughly enjoyable package of entertainment for the whole family. It's a fantastic and whimsical tale that can't help but please all those who see it.
Well, like you said, it was a big hit. It came out around Christmas time, and they immediately kind of greenlit the follow-up, which was not a sequel, but was going to, again, involve like similar characters and ended up being a different thing. But it was a big hit at the time.
Right. Yeah. Variety, always concerned mainly with whether something is going to do well at the box office. And they were correct that it did. But, I don't know that this is a movie even at the time. I mean, as the New York Times is saying, like for adults, this is pretty lacking, where I feel like I haven't seen Snow White in a long time, but I feel like generally Disney movies have a decent appeal to adults. And I imagine that's probably the case for that even at the beginning.
I think so. I mean, like, to reiterate, this was made because Snow White was so successful. So instead of building on that, right, as it's not a new trend, right? Hey, this was successful. Let's do a cheaper, a quicker version of it, and who cares if it's as good? It'll be a thing,
right? I mean, the thing that's sad about that though is that it's not like people who don't know what they're doing. I mean, as Variety says, there, the Fleischers are pioneers of animation just as much as Walt Disney is. And they'd been making shorts for decades with, some iconic characters like Popeye and Betty Boop. But, because they were put in the position maybe to rush through this, they weren't able to create the kind of movie that they had the potential to create.
Yeah. I mean, Max Fleischer, they said, you mentioned rotoscoping. He was the one who pioneered that technique. When there's a song and you follow the bouncing ball on the words, he started with that thing. So there's a lot of different things that these guys were capable of doing that I don't think they really got to do. Although they're animators and they animated the F out of this.
They did. That's one thing that they succeeded at. So Richard L. Coe in the Washington Post was not as happy with this. He said, fairy tale, satire, romance, and sermon, Gulliver's Travels delights the younger generation as much as it would disgust Jonathan Swift. For it is through the fairy story appeal to children that Dave Fleischer has decided he can achieve the widest audience for his 75-minute comic strip version of one of the world's bitterest satires. But it is this very definitely infantile appeal which will limit the film's staunchest admirers to the younger generation. The insertion of a prosaic romance into a story with enough novel motivation to fill a dozen films even further restricts this Gulliver within the realm of childhood. For what it is, however, we must admit Gulliver's Travels will very likely charm the children at a time of year when they are traditionally to be charmed.
Yeah, I mean, I don't blame the Fleischers. I'm sure that was the directive of Paramount. Like, hey, make a kids movie.
Right.
It's animated, right?
Yeah, so. No, totally. But if you are a Washington Post critic, you've probably read Jonathan Swift and can imagine that this is not the way you would hope for this story to come to the film.
And that's why all of my writing is relegated to all these local papers out here, Josh, because I haven't read Gulliver's Travels.
Yeah. Probably, I don't think that's the reason. But given that you haven't read Gulliver's Travels, anything else you want to say about the background here, Jason?
Gulliver's Travels became a holiday film from Thanksgiving to Christmas, and it was re-released in theaters all the way through the 60s. So you could watch it on TV in the 50s. You could see it in the movies in the 60s. Or whatever we say, it did fine. But Paramount still gave them the old screw job, Josh.
They did, yeah. And another company also gave them the screw job because at one point when rights to Fleischer films were sold, they lapsed, and that's why it's now in the public domain. And you can watch it like everywhere. And that, as happens with some movies like It's a Wonderful Life or Night of the Living Dead, when they're accidentally in the public domain, it often means that they're much more widely seen, which is the case, I think, with this film. But it also means that the people who were behind the making of the film didn't get paid later in their lives.
Get that money.
Right.
Yeah.
So
the film spun off two Fleischer cartoon series, the Gabby series and the Animated Antics, Josh.
Yeah, Gabby.
You like those?
Gabby is the like town crier character here who discovers Gulliver on the beach and kind of brings the word to Lilliput. So I haven't seen the shorts that they made after this, but he's certainly a recognizable character from this.
I mean, when you were watching this, were you like, hey, that guy needs his own show?
No, not at all. And I mean, I'm not really sure how they created his further adventures without Gulliver, but I did not look into that to find out.
Maybe he just went around to different places and yelled about the things that were going on.
That sounds about right for a cartoon series from the 1940s, honestly. So, Jason, given that this was so widely distributed, did you watch this as a kid?
No.
Oh, okay. I saw this many times, I believe, as a kid.
Whoa, really?
This movie, we just talked about The Wizard of Oz. This movie was as prevalent when I was a kid as The Wizard of Oz. For whatever reason, I think, in part because it was in the public domain. I actually just mentioned it to my mom when we were having dinner the other day. And I said, oh, we must have had like a VHS of this when I was a kid. And she said that we did. And I think also it was on TV a lot. And so this was another movie that I saw like bits and pieces of so many times and may or may not have actually sat down and watched from beginning to end, but it was very familiar to me. And for years, I just assumed it was a Disney movie because, we had all those other Disney movies on VHS or whatever, and this was animated, and I figured it was one of those as well, but of course it isn't. But yeah, this was like a childhood staple for some reason for me.
And what feelings did that bring up upon this watching, Josh?
Well, no feelings, really. Just kind of like, oh, I recognize that. I mean, I don't even think it was like a favorite. It was just there, It was just on. Maybe my sister or my brother liked it, and so they were putting it on, and I was in the room too or something.
I was hoping you would reveal something dark about your past,
No,
or
nothing.
you're longing for, or,
what, travels or small
Rosebud, whatever.
Yeah, no, not the case. So, Dave, did you watch this as a kid?
I genuinely do not remember, but I probably did at some point. And I considered this for my pick for this season when we first were talking about 1939.
Oh, okay. Are you regretting that you didn't pick this?
Nah.
Well, we're talking about it.
I mean, we're covering it,
that's
so
true.
I don't see why we would.
That's true.
So.
Fair enough. All right, we'll come back in a moment and talk more of our general thoughts on Gulliver's Travels. Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year. In this episode of our season on the films of 1939, we are talking about our animation pick, Gulliver's Travels from the Fleischer brothers. And Jason, as you said, story-wise, this movie does not really hold together very well.
I don't think there is a story. I did get this note, Josh. The novel Gulliver's Travels, published in 1726, was a political satire. Lilliput was created as a satire of Great Britain, while Blefuscu was a satire of France. Their long-standing geopolitical rivalry was a satire of the recurring wars between England and France. And Jonathan Swift was a clergyman, an Irish clergyman. See, Josh, I can copy things off of Wikipedia.
You sure can, but those things aren't accurate, I believe.
But it's, here, let me give you look, even the song that we talked about, the Forever and Faithful, like we have to do this. No, we have to do this. It's the same fucking song.
Well, I think that's the point, right? I mean, to give this movie a small amount of credit, like the specifics about songs being played at a wedding may not be from the novel, but the idea of these two kingdoms going to war over something silly and irrelevant is what Swift is satirizing. And as you said, these repeated wars between England and France over issues of, whatever it was at the time of the royal succession or something like that are things that he obviously thought were petty and ridiculous. And so in their own kind of dumbed down, kid-friendly way, I think they're attempting to capture that here.
Okay, I can buy that, but I don't think it's executed well because, like no one recognizes the same song until they recognize that the song could be put together the same way. I don't know. Would it have been more effective if it was a different song, or I don't know. The whole bit maybe just doesn't work. Maybe that's the issue.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that it's not generally well executed, but I think them being the same song is the point, that these two, kingdoms, they're so entrenched in their own worlds and the idea that we're better than the other one that they couldn't even see that until Gulliver, the benevolent outsider or whatever, comes in and is like, hey guys, guess what? They're the same. Just combine them. Thank you. I'm leaving.
Yeah, I talked to my sentient horses friends and they told me this is what you should do.
Yeah. And, he solves their problems or whatever. So, I mean, I was okay with that, I guess, sort of as a concept, because again, I feel like this is probably the Fleischer sitting there like, okay, how can we encapsulate some of what Jonathan Swift is trying to do, but in a way that will fit with this kid-focused animated movie? And it's, we have to have songs because it's got to be a musical and all this stuff. And that's a way to make that work.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that. You got to just have bones to this thing, and there's no bones. It's just kind of like a shapeless blob, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, and even that we're talking about so much as like sort of the central conflict of the film is really a relatively minor element. I mean, you've got Gulliver himself showing up on the beach, and that very long sequence where they build this kind of giant scaffolding around him so they can transport him into the town. And what are we going to do with Gulliver and being afraid of him and all this stuff that's outside of just this dispute between the kingdoms.
Right. There are missed opportunities. We spend so much time on the like, hey, we've locked Gulliver down. They were able to transport him. But, the beginning of the movie is like, it's like a manuscript, the page, right? Where you say like, and here's a tale of my greatest adventure, right? There's not really an adventure. He's sleeping through half of it. We could maybe do an opening sequence with a big shipwreck or something, right? And like up the excitement on this thing and incorporate him more. I mean, he's just there and then he's talking to the king. He doesn't really learn how the island works or the societies or anything. I mean, even as a peacemaker, I feel like he could have understood these societies in deeper ways, Josh.
Right. And I think a lot of the book is about him traveling to these different societies and learning all about their rules and customs and understanding them and how they're different from present day, at the time, English society. And that's kind of the point of what Swift is doing. And none of that is going on here.
And that would be fun. I mean, there's a lot of, fodder you could get out of that, I think.
Right. I mean, the question again is like, how do you sort of adjust that so that it becomes a kid-friendly thing? And maybe that's not something that they could figure out. And also that it's, 75 minutes long and you got to put a bunch of songs in there. But I mean, I agree. There's a lot of missed opportunities where you could still adapt this book and change it to suit the kind of movie that you're trying to make, but capture more of what the book itself is actually about.
I think kind of we probably guessed it right in that, hey, man, you have to have this out by Christmas of 1939. So, pick 2 or 3 big set pieces, build around that, and then, put in some campy, happy songs and we'll get the movie going, as opposed to actually structuring this thing.
Right. And that like Gabby character, for example, you can imagine after them being so successful with those shorts where they have these ongoing wacky characters like Popeye or Betty Boop, that they're looking at it like, hey, look, if we put this Gabby guy in here, maybe we can spin him off and make him one of our signature characters like those other ones, even if he doesn't necessarily fit in like the story of Gulliver's Travels.
We keep comparing it to Disney, but I think maybe a more apt comparison is to Artem, because they take really simple stories with really, really basic plots, and they blow those things out. So the set pieces are really involved and kind of, they not only are involved, but they encapsulate the audience's attention in such a way. Chicken Run is basically how do the chickens escape the coop, or Shaun of the Sheep. Like, they're all such simple stories, but they're done in such great, brilliant ways that I think that would be something more that I would have wanted from this.
Yeah, I'd love to see an Aardman version of Gulliver's Travels. I feel like that could be a good source material for that. Like if someone is going to make a Gulliver's Travels that might actually be worth watching, whether it's Yorgos Lanthimos or Aardman Animation, one of those, maybe they could team up somehow to make a Gulliver's Travels movie.
I mean, Aardman would make such a cool looking piece too.
Right. I mean, and hey, like I said, that Soviet film from years before this even was made with stop motion. So it was obviously something that was thought of as a way to represent this story all that long ago too.
Right. Even you could see with like an Aardman piece, right? It would be Gulliver's tied down and he's coming up with strange ways to try to escape before he gets to the king. The wars would be much more Rube Goldberg contraptions, and it would be, there's a lot of fun to be had with this material. And I think we keep coming back to the point that we missed the fun.
Yeah. Were there any moments in this film that you thought were fun or creative?
I mean, I thought the last battle where, he's walking into the sea and they're firing like these cannonballs at him and they look like just little specks because he's a giant. And I liked looking at the movie. I liked the look of it, of course, but I was just pretty bored throughout.
Yeah, I think Dave said this in his letterbox, and I concurred that it was hard to stay awake through a lot of this film. Actually, I watched the movie and then I was going afterwards to put together some notes, and I was looking at the plot summary and I was like, oh shit, I just missed this one part. And I had to go back, and luckily, because it's in the public domain, the movie itself is on the Wikipedia page, and I skimmed back through it to say to remind myself what I had possibly been nodding off during a couple parts of this film. So yeah, it is very dull. It's almost like a lullaby for children in a way. You could put this on and lull your child to sleep.
I mean, this should have been the 4-minute movie. This could have been a nice 4-minute movie.
Right. And obviously that's something that the Fleischers were good at, making movies that were probably about 4 minutes. And, storytelling wise, it's tough to level up from that to something that's even a short feature, even 75 minutes.
Yeah. I think I don't know these Fleischers, Josh.
Yeah.
I'm sure they were more than capable of getting it done. I think that they were put in a situation that they had to dig themselves out of a hole, which they did do, yet they still were charged $350,000 for doing it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and I agree. I think if they were given more time and maybe given more leeway, they could have produced something that would have been stronger as a piece of storytelling. So I did think there were some moments that I liked. I mean, like you said, the animation is so gorgeous, is that when they can combine that in their, use the visuals to make some kind of impressive set piece. I mean, I liked the bit where the Lilliputians kind of put on a show for Gulliver, and he's sitting there eating dinner or whatever at like a table, which is really like a giant cliff, and they kind of do this dance. And at one point, he puts his giant hand down and he's like dancing with the king or whatever. Like his fingers are then the king is
slow dancing.
Right, exactly. And I thought that was a creative way to demonstrate the size difference, and that it had a sort of beauty to it, like a dance number from a live action musical or whatever. And obviously something you could never do in live action. So moments like that, where it's like they can combine the visual creativity that they're good at with some element of the story that they can bring to life, were nice, I thought.
Yeah. And I mean, right now I'm thinking about Pixar, right? Where you can make a movie, you can watch the movie and be like, this doesn't work. Let's resequence this, which you have that ability to do with animation. Sure, that's CGI. It's a little different, but with the time, you can make these things happen. So I don't know. There was just very little to connect with here. Dave, you want to talk about the music?
I mean, you were talking about the songs being unmemorable. I mean, I didn't really think much of the music necessarily either. I mean, to me, it was just all animation. The animation was great. Everything else was kind of second rate.
I mean, you said you were going to maybe make this your pick, Dave. Was there some particular thing you liked about it?
Well, thanks for asking. I mean, it's clearly such a major inspiration on Sam Raimi and Army of Darkness. So that's why. And like I said, I think I might have seen it as a kid. This was definitely one of those movies that was around. But I've always known of it as, that movie that inspired the entire middle sequence of Army of Darkness. So that's why I was really looking forward to rewatching it for this.
I haven't seen Army of Darkness in a while. Like, does he go to a place where he's a giant?
He gets split into all these little miniature ashes, and they jump on top of him and tie him down, just like with Gulliver on the beach. But it takes place inside of a windmill, so it's a little different, but basically the same sequence. And I guess the original script, it was like an even bigger sequence. It was like 10 minutes longer in the original script for Army of Darkness. So, I mean, it was like a big, element of the story.
So it's just one portion of that film, not the movie as a whole.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I mean, I can see that the visual creativity of this film, especially, again, because it ended up in the public domain, because it was shown on TV so much and re-released in theaters so much, that someone like Sam Raimi might have seen it as a kid and been captivated by the way that it looked and incorporated that into later, maybe better films that they made.
Sure.
I mean, Dave, this is your chance, man. Gulliver versus Kong.
Gulliver. I'm down.
Well, but Kong, like Gulliver is a normal human-sized person.
Once again,
it would just be like Jason versus Kong or whatever. Like, I mean, and not Jason Voorhees, but you, Jason.
You're thinking too linearly, right? He's already made all these friends. So he first of all, he has friends who are giants, the Proctignabians, right? So he can recruit them. He has sentient horses. He's got flying, whatever they are, creatures, people, I don't know. He's got little tiny Lilliputians. So he's got a whole army, a cadre of characters to help him fight Kong, Josh.
Although I feel like
Josh, do you think that maybe Jason is a Lilliputian and that's why he keeps thinking of Gulliver as being big?
Jason,
is that what's happening?
I understand that Gulliver is normal size, guys. Let's just get this clear. But Gulliver versus Kong, I would watch that movie.
Also, I think, I mean, again, I haven't read the book in a very long time, but I think part of the point is that none of these people are his allies, that he goes to these places and then he messes with them and they kick him out and they don't like him. So,
well, I mean, he just basically bartered a peace treaty between these two nations that were at war and created a unity for the marriage of Prince and Princess.
Prince David, I think, maybe. And
Princess Glory was her name.
That could be it. Yeah.
Again, two characters who offer nothing.
Right. Yeah, no, that is their names. But yeah, they barely even speak, those characters. Mostly they just kind of like stand there and look longingly off into the distance and sing a little bit. But yeah, I mean, if they're trying to copy Disney, like there's nothing to this character compared to like even Snow White and Prince Charming from the Disney Snow White movie.
Well, I mean, and the Seven Dwarves, like, I mean, just by their names, their characters, right?
True.
So, you can see Dopey or Grumpy in your head right now.
What about Gabby?
And know who
he gabs because he's Gabby.
That's what I was just going to say. Can you tell me what Gabby looks like right now, Josh?
He looks like one of the Seven Dwarfs is really what he looks like.
Well, of course, they used a lot of the same talent, a lot of the same voice actors and animators probably that Disney did.
Right.
So.
Yeah. I mean, Pinto Colvig, who plays Gabby, is also the original voice of Goofy. So they definitely brought over some serious talent from Disney to use in this film.
Gabby versus Godzilla?
Yeah. Why not? We had Bambi versus Godzilla. That's a thing,
I'm just gonna gossip that monster back into the sea.
Yeah. You're gonna keep. Jason's really into the verses. We had John Dielman versus Barry Lyndon back a couple seasons ago.
That's still our best movie pitch in the history of the show.
That is quality. So
I think what would happen is John Dielman would maybe stab someone, but it would be a fake stabbing, much like how they got rid of Barry Lyndon out of the aristocratic setting that he was so beholden to.
I feel like Gulliver, in a way, is kind of like Barry Lyndon in that he's meant to be this sort of like bumbler who thinks more highly of himself, and that's why he stumbles into these various strange worlds and decides that he knows best what they should be doing.
Well, I think you and I have interpreted this character differently because I just see him as an explorer. And again, like using the evidence of creating peace between two warring nations. I don't see him as a bumbler. In fact, he was basically like, hey, you two, you're in love, you get married. And they're like, yeah, Gulliver, you're right. So then, if anything, he's the opposite of that, Right.
No, you're right in that's the way he's presented here. I think what I'm saying is that the way he is meant to be presented in the book is more like a Barry Lyndon kind of figure rather than the way they have him in the film.
Looks like we got to have another spin-off besides Feel the Burns, a book club podcast.
Yeah. I mean, they're like Feel the Burns. No one else is doing. I'm sure there are plenty of podcasts where people read books and discuss them. I mean, that's pretty.
What
common.
If we on the book club podcast reviewed Ed Burns's book, Independent Ed, which I've read?
I feel like that's maybe better suited to the Feel the Burns podcast, where that would be like the culmination. We watch all 8 or whatever Ed Burns films, and then we reread his book.
Feel the book.
Yeah, that's the finale of that series that we are never ever going to create. But what if Ed Burns played Gulliver?
I mean, he could do it, Josh. I think we've run out of material.
I think so. I think so too. That's fair. You want to rate this out of I don't know, 5 little people?
5 Lilliputians?
5 Lilliputians?
Lilliputians? Yeah. So it only gets 2 for me, and it's all for the animation, Josh. 2 Lilliputians.
Yeah, I'm going to give it 2.5, but I think it's for the same reason, for the animation. That is really gorgeous. And like I said, a handful of moments here and there that I thought were kind of cleverly done. But overall, this is more of a historical curiosity, I think, than a great film.
I know, but even saying that, I think we would have been better served watching some of the, Betty Boop cartoons and some of their shorter works, like you said, Popeye and everything.
Right.
Like that.
Yeah. Maybe more entertaining. So, Dave, how would you rate this?
Yeah, I'm going 2.5, but same thing that both of you said.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll come back and talk about the legacy of Gulliver's Travels. Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year. In this episode of our season on the films of 1939, we are talking about our animation pick, Gulliver's Travels, from the Fleischer brothers. And as we said, unfortunately, despite the fact that this movie was a big hit, it essentially ultimately led to the downfall of Fleischer Studios. They were in debt to Paramount Pictures because of going over budget on this. And even though they got the green light to make another feature film because of the success of this, That movie, unfortunately, Mr. Bug Goes to Town, which was released in 1941, was a box office failure. It had the misfortune to be released, I think, like 2 days before the attack on Pearl Harbor, like those movies that came out right before 9/11 or whatever. And people were not in the mood for going to see Mr. Bug at that time. And eventually that led to Paramount kind of pushing out the Fleischers, taking over the studio and renaming it Famous Studios and making it sort of Paramount's own animation division.
Have you seen Mr. Bug Goes to Town?
I have not, and it's not really like a well-known film, although I don't know, maybe if we do an awesome movie year on 1941, we could talk about it as the flop of the year.
I mean, we're definitely going to do 1941. We know how many big things have come out there.
Yeah, that is true. So maybe we'll get to that, but it was not a success. I think it has been maybe reassessed a bit. I saw, just skimming the entry on that it was actually released as part of some sort of Studio Ghibli collection at one point. Maybe it's a Miyazaki influence or something like that. So that's interesting.
Well, I watched it.
Oh.
And, just to sum it up for you, I'm Mr. Bug, and I'm here, and I'm going to filibuster until you give me this town, this camp for these bugs, these little bugs. I need a camp to go to. I'll read the whole bug constitution if I have to.
For a second, I thought you had actually watched this movie, and I was interested to hear what you thought of it, but you just wanted to do your bad Jimmy Stewart impression again.
Bad Jimmy Stewart is making a lot of appearances this season. Yeah. And good Jimmy Stewart made a lot of appearances in 1939.
He did indeed. So, it's disappointing that they were like these pioneers, again, of animation with all of those shorts that they made prior to this. And they did later make other shorts. I mean, they're very famous for the Superman short films, and that started after this. So that was something that they did that still made a huge impact. But this was really sort of the beginning of the end for Fleischer Studios. And they did make 8 shorts with Gabby, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's a real bummer. Mickey Mouse, Bugs Bunny, Gabby. Yeah. So no, it would. I mean, like Betty Boop's iconic, and it would have been. I don't know. It just seems like these guys got a real raw deal. So it's a bummer because they were doing their own style of animation, and that could have been really fruitful and for decades to come.
Right. And you could see, just like Disney built up to doing animated movies based on or incorporating some of their early shorts characters, you could have seen eventually a Betty Boop feature film or a Popeye animated feature film or an animated Superman feature film or something like that could have been really successful. But because they didn't have the same resources and, Disney was its own studio and they were working with Paramount, who kind of pushed them out, they weren't able to achieve that.
And now none of us get Betty Boop versus Mechazilla.
Yeah. And the Fleischers themselves, their careers kind of didn't really go anywhere. I mean, they both continued working sporadically in Hollywood. Max Fleischer ended up working in educational films and toward the end of his life actually did regain the rights to Betty Boop. Dave Fleischer worked as a technical advisor with various Hollywood studios. And I think the most notable thing that he did later in his career is he directed Let's All Go to the Lobby, the very, very famous, movie theater ad that they still show in movie theaters now.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of heavy hitters involved with this thing, Joe Aurelio, who played the Italian barber, was the co-creator of Casper the Friendly Ghost and Felix the Cat. He was the creator of that. All of these musicians were, or composers, they were huge songwriters of the day. Leo Robin won an Oscar in 1938 for Thanks for the Memories, the Bob Hope song, Thanks for the Memory. And just a lot of talent involved that I think just couldn't do their best work.
Yeah, I mean, as we said, some of the voice actors here too. Pinto Colvig, of course, who voices Gabby, was the original voice of Goofy. He did continue to voice Gabby in those short films. He voiced Bluto in the Popeye short films. He played Bozo the Clown, and he even did a Munchkin voice in The Wizard of Oz.
Yeah, so that's good. So.
Yeah, Jack Mercer, another voice actor in this film, was the second, I think, voice actor to play Popeye. He also did the voices, all the voices, every single voice in the entire Felix the Cat cartoon series.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So, I mean, incredibly talented people. Lanny Ross and Jessica Dragonette, who do the singing voices of the Prince and the Princess, had very popular songs in the 1940s. So, I mean, a lot of people they recruited who were working steadily, like you said, in animation and voice work and whatever, and, have some iconic, the voice of Goofy, we can still hear it in our heads, and that's something that Pinto Colvig created.
I actually see the guy who plays the voice of Goofy every summer at the Cordillera Film Festival. He's like the chair. Forget it's Bill is his first name.
The current voice of Goofy.
Yeah. He's a lovely guy.
Not Pinto Colvig's ghost.
No, he's a real good guy, Bill Farmer. He's just a lovely gentleman, and he is proud of his work, and as well as he should be. But he knows like he's part of film and pop culture history,
right? And I'm sure that's something where you get that gig and you go back and you study what Pinto Colvig did in the very earliest Goofy shorts, so that you can capture that.
So, Josh, Pinto Colvig, we've spoken about, but what's weird is the guy who played the voice of Gulliver as talking was Sam Parker. He was a radio announcer, and he won a contest out of like 500 contestants to play Gulliver. It's very strange, especially considering that the names that they were throwing around to play Gulliver, which I think would have elevated this film because you would have had to give him more material, were Bing Crosby and Gary Cooper.
Yeah, and Sam Parker not only does the voice of Gulliver, but because they used rotoscoping, he is the physical presence of Gulliver as well. So especially if they had gotten someone like Bing Crosby or Gary Cooper, who's a recognizable screen star, that would have made a massive difference in how this movie was presented.
I'm just thinking of Gulliver and David Bowie singing Peace on Earth.
Man, how many different figures from pop culture can we throw in alongside Gulliver here?
What choice do we have, Josh? Some of those songs, though, did go on for famous studios. It's a happy day and all as well. But, I keep knocking Faithful and Forever, where it's just called Faithful Forever. But both Glenn Miller and Judy Garland covered it. I think those would have been interesting to hear.
Yeah, probably better than the versions that ended up in this film.
I think so.
As we said, Gulliver's Travels has a very extensive yet crappy history of adaptation. I feel like there's never really been
there's not a good one, is there?
Exactly. This, as I said, there were previous ones, and the Méliès film is good, but it's, again, it's 4 minutes. There's barely anything to it in terms of a plot. There are, some more well-known versions. There's a 1977 film starring Richard Harris. In 1996, Jason, you complained that nobody does the full book. There was a TV miniseries starring Ted Danson as Gulliver, which does adapt the entirety of the story, but it looks like is probably not very good, but it gets it all in there at least. And I have seen the 2010 film starring Jack Black as Gulliver, which just does the Lilliput section and is very comedically focused and is bad.
Josh, I think you just hit it again, man. Dude, limited series, get one of these, get a David Lowery, get someone here that's really creative, and let's go to town on this thing. Imagine if the team behind like Station 11 did a Gulliver's Travels.
Yeah, I wonder. Because again, it's in the public domain. Anyone could give that a shot right now. And I wonder if maybe it's just got too much baggage or something, and too many bad versions of it that no one wants to try to do their own, only to fail.
I guess my pitch would be like, what do you know about Gulliver's Travels? And everyone would say, well, he was a giant compared to the Lilliputians and they tied him up. And then you would just say, well, did you know about the sentient horses or the flying creatures or the fact that he was actually in a land full of giants? There's so much more material to be mined here.
Yeah, and it could be. The other thing is that, like a lot of public domain material, there are a lot of sort of loose spin-offs or rip-offs that just slap the name on it or use the concept of it and create some sort of story. I think a year or two ago watched this awful animated movie called Gulliver Returns that was actually produced in Ukraine and was allegedly co-written by Vladimir Zelensky, who of course was in the entertainment industry in the Ukraine before becoming the president there. And is very, very bad. I watched like an English dub of it for my column that I write about VOD releases. But, anyone can grab Gulliver and some of these elements and throw together some sort of story, no matter who you are, and not a guarantee of quality, certainly.
I got one more fun fact for you, Josh.
Ooh, fun fact.
Yeah, I'm full of them. This was the first film in which voice actors were actually credited.
Well, they should be credited, really. That's that.
Well, I know. I shouldn't even have to say that.
Right.
But before this, they had never had credits.
Right, right. Yeah, that's a shame. I wonder how long it took Disney to credit their voice actors because, they're the gold standard there.
Yeah, so here, I'll give you one more, Josh, a bonus fun fact. Just reading this, I pulled this from Wikipedia. Inspired by the findings of social workers in juvenile courts that scores of young Black children had never seen a motion picture, producer Max Fleischer teamed up with the movie theater owners Mitchell Wolfson and Sidney Meyer to ensure that underprivileged children in Miami's Black community were able to see the movie. That's pretty cool. I think they had like 1,000 kids who had never seen a movie come see this one.
Yeah, that's nice. I mean, and the fact that we assume now that this is a major thing for kids, but animated feature films barely had existed at this point. And so, to get something that was made specifically for kids and done in this manner and get those kids to see it is pretty cool.
Gulliver.
All right. That's Gulliver's Travels. And that is this episode of Awesome Movie Year. You can travel on over to our presence online and on social media.
First, travel the letterbox and find me at Go for Jason. Then go take a nap. And if you still want to go for more, I'm at Jason Harris Comedy or Jay Harris Comedy on all the socials. We're awesomemovieyear.com. Awesome Movie Year on Facebook and Instagram. Awesome Movie Pod on Gulliver's X.
Gulliver's Twitter. You can find some old stuff from me at joshbellhateseverything.com. I am at Josh Bell Hates Everything on Facebook and at Signal Bleed on Twitter X and on Blue Sky and on Letterboxd, where you can also tag your reviews, Awesome Movie Year, if you watch this or any other movie that we talk about, and listen to our producer David Rosen's awesome podcast, Piecing It Together.
Check out Piecing It Together wherever you listen to podcasts. Follow us on social media at Piecing Pod, and check out our Facebook group, Popcorn and Puzzle Pieces, where I'm sure there's some fans of those terrible Gulliver's Travels adaptations throughout the years.
I feel like anytime we mention something terrible, there are some fans of it in the Popcorn and Puzzle Pieces group. It's a given. So, Jason, what are we doing in our next episode?
Josh, far be it from me to announce your pick. I rest the floor to you, sir.
Much like Mr. Smith.
I yield. Yes, yeah. I yield to you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. My pick is George Cukor's The Women, a favorite of mine, which I've seen a couple times and I'm looking forward to watching again. So tune in next time for The Women, and thanks for listening to Awesome Movie Year.
Thank you for listening to Awesome Movie Year. Make sure to follow Awesome Movie Year on Facebook, at Awesome Movie Pod on Twitter, and at Awesome Movie Year on Instagram. And if you like the show, review us and rate us with 5 stars on Apple Podcasts.
An All Points West production, produced by David Rosen in Las Vegas.